Welcome to Inside Events, a new international podcast focused on contemporary issues in events and festivals. This week, I'm joined by Dr. Sandra, and we're going to be talking about cultural programming and integrating local creative industries in the context of events. Welcome, Sandra. If you could give us a little bit of an overview in terms of you, your role, the organization that you work for, the conference that you're running, and why are you interested in this particular topic?
Okay. Thank you, Mike, for inviting me on this podcast. This topic has been very close to my heart. Way before I became an academic, I was actually a producer for festivals and events, and I'll talk more about that. But who am I? I'm actually the co-chair of the Seven Experiences Summit, the program leader of BA Event Management degree program at the Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand. And I'm also the associate editor in Mike's team with the Event Management Journal. I like to call myself a creative placemaker as well. Also known as I like to be, how should I put it, introduce myself as a practicing academic. So I believe that, in event management, we need to continue to practice and keep up to date with the industry as we, continue to do our research and all. So, like I said, way before I became an academic, I was a producer. So I produced arts festival, cultural festivals, and the list goes on. A lot to do with different genre of music as well. So my role actually allows me a lot of opportunities to work with artists and producers, or if you like, people in the creative industries. And as a producer, we kind of um, blend, all this thing together in creating, like a new event, if you like, or a new art form. So it's kind of interesting in that sense, and so it becomes second nature to me as a researcher as well, to be continuing in this area about anything to do with culture, the arts, or programming. Yeah.
Super. And when it comes to kind of the idea of cultural programming, there'll
Mm-hmm.
be quite a few students, for example, that are unaware of what we mean by cultural programming and the integration of local creative interests. Could you explain a little bit about what you mean by cultural programming, I guess?
Okay. Actually, it's the very first time I heard of, the term being put together, cultural programming. Usually when we say programming, it's sort of like a general term that we use to be thinking about what do we want to put, in the program, whether is it for for any event. It's like a run sheet, some people call it in layman term. But when we program something, we have to decide where is the thing happening, who are we going to be putting in the program. But I think the word cultural programming came into light when we are talking about bigger events, like I think with the Olympics. I hear a lot of use of cultural programming because how the city is putting themselves out there, presenting themselves and their culture and their talents. So in breaking that down, I think programming is very much like the soul, of a play. I mean, when I was working in the art center, I remember the head of programming actually says that, our team, our department is actually the soul of the art center. You have marketing and you have operations and front of house, and the list goes on, right? But programming is sort of like the soul of the art center. So whatever we put in the art center, yeah, it basically connects with the people, with the place as well.
Mm.
And I think if we put it in a bigger context where programming is concerned, in a city or destination, the whole destination becomes a stage. Just like the example that I gave about the art center. So it's actually quite exciting
Mm.
programming. And like you said in the beginning, if we were to tell students about programming, a lot of people thought, "What, computer programming?" you know. But yeah, it's actually uh, the more difficult aspect of planning, I would say.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
I think that was that was a useful response to that. And for us, we've, like you said, cultural programmers come into our mega events, major events work, and that there's obviously the whole overarching question of
Yeah.
whose interests are being
Mhm.
represented in the city. And given
Yeah.
that it's a citywide often thing, or even multiple citywide thing, there's
Mhm.
a huge amount of interest, and who you decide or what you decide to put in your program
Mm.
reflects who you are.
Yeah.
To your point about the soul,
Yeah.
the programming aspect is essentially who you want to represent and whose interests are at the center of your identity as a place, and what you put on it. So it becomes a very, in all the contexts that I've looked at, it's always been a really contentious issue. Who
Mhm.
gets the funding? Who gets the space? Who gets the time? Who gets the resourcing to support your sort of cultural programming? So, what, in a sense, then, that answers partly why we should be interested and why we should care about it. But are there any particular points that you'd want to kind of hammer home, Sandra, in terms of why we should care about this idea?
Okay. I think it depends on when and who we are programming for and what we are programming for. Yeah, because if we are talking about a mega event in sight and we are programming for the city, then I think it is important for us to consider, um, the inclusivity of the event. Then we need to think about who are the stakeholders we want to involve. Because, like I said, it depends on how big a stage we are playing. For a bigger event, we consider, on-site programming where it happens in a venue. But then we need to consider the other stakeholders who are not in the venue, who are off-site. So it's actually a very big area to program. And, we are almost talking about multiple programmers. And I like to always think of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe
Mm.
as an example, because even though it's sort of the fringe is within the what we call the tourism bubble, right, within the Edinburgh city centre. But the thing is, I think they have also learned that in order to benefit the other people who are outside of the city centre, that they have to start to have some satellite
Mm.
events
Mm.
outside of that. And I think, yeah, it's a very complex thing, but it is possible. It's very exciting talking about that. Um, yeah, so I would imagine um, a lot more that can be done, multiple venues, different communities being involved
Mm.
in programming it. Yeah. So,
It's interesting you mention about, the satellite places. In essence, just
mhm.
from having a chat with Shona, who
Yeah,
runs the Fringe,
yeah,
it is about bringing marginal interests into the orbit, to use your space analogy,
yeah,
into the orbit of the event. And most of the types of events that I look at, mainly sporting actually events, then most of yours are probably more cultural,
Yeah.
festivity and that sort of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
we come at it from two very different types of events, but they all have the same problem, which that they fail to meaningfully engage
Mm-hmm.
with the destination often, and they're very parochial in their programming. So they tend to be. I always describe sports events as cities within cities. They essentially are huge cities, bordered, lots of things going on, but they very much don't resonate with what's going on outside of the border of the
Mm-hmm.
marathon or the event zone, for example. So
Mm-hmm.
programming is a concept that I just personally believe, or that I think the research indicates, just isn't really considered by sport event managers really at all. They're too busy focusing on in venue or in event zone programming, which is an. Have you seen that kind of problem before in both the sports and the cultural setting, Sandra?
Yes, it is still happening, Mike. I will take the FIFA Women's World Cup in New Zealand, for example. Um, it's a very successful event. Um, I have to say, and but before I give my point of view to answer to your question, is that there are people who students of mine who do not feel the energy of the event
Mm,
because they were not involved, but there were students who were excited about the event because they were engaged as volunteers in the during the fan festival,
mm,
and others who are working in the stadium and all that. Yeah, so
interesting.
it is still happening even for arts festival, big arts festival all over the world. Yeah, they are still contained within a particular area, and they are not really, like you said, engaging with the other communities. I think it continues to be a challenge.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I completely
yeah.
understand that. And when it comes to like kind of the idea or concept of programming, cultural programming,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I first saw it when it comes to the kind of cultural Olympiad, which is the kind of the years long program leading
Yeah.
up to the Olympics, which is all about kind of representing local identity and culture, as well as the all the sport and all the elite people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it is. How's the concept developed, perhaps over the years, Sandra? And what do you think the future trends are of programming?
Okay, I think it has become more theatrical in terms of programming. Storytelling continue to be, something very important. Um, and I think depending on which um, country we are looking at, I think different area has their culture and a different story to tell. Um, like if I were to take there are two Olympics that is very much ingrained in my head, the opening itself. And one of it is the Beijing 2008. And and I remember when somebody said it was second to none in terms of programming. I think that started sort of like the whole trend of how people then consider film. I think they were using one of their film producer in producing the cultural program. So it made quite a lot of difference. And there were like a lot of multimedia works at the same time on that, that they have a giant screen. Yeah, with I recall there were calligraphy works that was happening, and they were engaging a lot of their local people. Um, I think one of the thing China did really well for that particular year that I was very impressed about is the way they deploy people, the way, when we talk about programming, it goes beyond the artistic program itself. It's about um, it's about the show before, leading up to that opening program, and how they train their people culturally as well in, the, uh, engaging with people who need guidance, going to the site itself. And what else is there? They were using their soldiers as well for one particular segment, but they were not in their military uniform, but they were in their I think some traditional outfit. And yeah, so it was quite nice to see um, different people from different segment of the community coming together for that particular show. I thought that was really nice. Yeah. And then for London 2012, I think because, England and the monarchy, you see the Queen, being sort of like um, at the center stage, although, yeah, she was in
Mm,
the air. And then yeah, so it's interesting how we see that through the years there are still representation of the culture of the place and in the programming itself. Um, so I haven't seen a lot of there's no significant changes yet because it's all representative of the identity of the place, the talents that they have. Um, and like you see today, if someone is presenting an event in Korea, I think we can all imagine how it's going to look like in terms of programming. We
mm,
all know K-pop in Korea.
mm,
Yeah, and what else is that? There's also the traditional side of Korea. So, like in any city, there's always a traditional
mm,
um, cultural programming, and then there is always the contemporary one. Yeah. And then the other part is how do you mix the two together?
mm.
Yeah.
I
Um,
remember looking at, we did a
yeah.
bit of research on Japan and Tokyo for the Tokyo 2020 games, and the way in which they represented traditional and contemporary culture through this poster campaign called Tokyo Tokyo, which is
Yeah.
just the two sides of Tokyo. And, they would have, kind of anime characters next to kind of kabuki, and
Yeah.
and they would illustrate that we've got these roots, but yet we're kind of projecting into the future, and we want to represent ourselves as a contemporary international tourist destination that has more to do than what you think there is to do. And
Yeah.
it was their way of almost kind of projecting a more plural version of what their destination had to offer. And I just
Mm.
found it exceptionally interesting because major events were one of the only ways in which they could probably spend and have the excuse to spend so much money on rethinking and re-imaging their
Yeah.
place. And it was just such a great, I think, case study of a place changing people's perceptions of what it had to offer in some sense. It was fascinating, fascinating.
Mhm.
Sandra, if we had to think about some future resources or further resources and reading that people might want to do around this topic area, where would you suggest that people look?
Well, if they are academic or students, I'll, I think, you know, there is actually a couple of journals they can refer to, like the I found some good articles. There's one by Garcia about 100 years of cultural programming within the Olympic Games, and they can, find that in International Journal of Cultural Policy. And But I would say the first place to go to, because it's about events, is to go to the event management journal.
Awesome. Number
Yeah,
one resource for events.
number one resource. Yeah, and there's going to be a lot more articles coming up. Yeah, about mega events. And where else? There are lots and lots of. The first place to go to might be to have a look at. There are lots of great literatures that are, not scientific journals as well, about cultural programming. But then again, like I said, cultural programming for who and for what, it
Mm,
doesn't necessarily need to be for major events, but it could be for smaller events as
mm,
well. And actually, Mike, something we didn't quite touch on programming is in future it could go beyond, just programming performing arts, or there are the likes of how should I put it? Programming in retail store, programming in
mm,
F&B outlets. It's like the whole city is being programmed.
mm.
Yeah, just like
And and
Disneyland.
all- and I think about in the US what it means, programming and hospitality and experiences more generally, is that you look at hospitals and in the US and they have cultural programming. They are stages. The whole hospitality and high quality experiences
Yeah.
side of hospitals in the US is remarkable. They're almost treated like 5-star hotels in lots of ways, and they are really interesting spaces for a different type of programming for the guests.
Mm.
And I remember having a chat with, I think, a couple of Japanese scholars who were doing some applied work in hospitals to try and increase people's well-being through staging small festivals inside hospitals to improve mental health, which would help
Mm.
recovery from physical problems. And so it was really interesting to
Yeah.
see how all of our sector and our stuff is being applied in spaces that are not traditionally utilizing them, but could do so for positive mental
Mhm.
well-being and health effects. So
I
that's
like
kind
what
of
you
it,
just
right?
I like what you just said, because I'm going to talk about the next point, which is very much relevant to the future that we're going to be looking at. Um, you know, maybe it's not about programming anymore, Mike.
Maybe
Maybe it's about experience design.
experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, because like what you said, the hospital doesn't feel like a hospital anymore, because you're putting, um, you're giving patient a different experience, positive transformation,
Mm,
if
mm.
you like. Well, like I said, I think I've spoken to you earlier on that I'm working on a conference. It's called the Seven Experiences Summit, and this is the fourth year we are running it. It started in 2020 during the lockdown period, and so this is a multidisciplinary kind of summit, and we welcome anyone who is interested in, working with people from across other industries, to be, uh, and as long as you're interested in human centered design experiences, whether you're in events, architecture,
Mm.
ICT, engineering. Yeah, we just we thought it is time for people to start thinking about technologies and how we use them, and how do we create new experiences. um, I don't know, what do you think about that, Mike? It's like, with events and technologies, where do we go from here? And not all events practitioners are technologists or engineers. Yeah, we can
Not
dream,
at
we can
all.
imagine. Yeah, but we need to work with people from different sectors to be able to create something or
Mm.
program something that is, fabulous and out of the world. So Imagineers would need to be engineers too.
It's
Yeah.
so true. It's so
Yeah.
true. Like I find a lot of the people that I work with in the events industry, one, not very creative at all, very process driven. Um, it's all about putting on the event or the operational side and making sure that it's safe, efficient. People get in and out. They have parking. They have all these almost kind of fairly basic level operational requirements. When it comes to the design and changing people's spiritual side and the soul that you mentioned, Sandra,
Yeah.
I find there are some people that I've worked with that are very much in tune with that, right? But I would say 80% aren't. They're for example, like just take a marathon. Those
Yeah.
ideas that I suggested in terms of, I find running quite boring, and actually, there's a way in which you could use kind of XR VR headsets to layer on histories, cultural programming within the virtual space as people run. There's
Yeah.
ways to easily integrate tech in that sense, but the problem is the industry is exceptionally risk averse. Why would I? The question you would always get is, why would I experiment with technology
Mhm.
when I have a fine product? When people come to this event knowing what they're going to get, and it might ruin what their expectations are or something. There needs to be way more experimentation and play in
Yes.
festivals, but there at the moment there's not a huge amount of space for it. But yeah, maybe in the future. Sandra,
Mm.
we're going to have to wrap it up. I've got another podcast in a couple of minutes.
All
But
right.
thank you so much for
Yeah.
coming on Inside Events. It was a really great introduction into programming and what the past and the future is, and some of the pitfalls. But hopefully we'll have you again on Inside Events in the future to talk about maybe a follow up to your Experiences Summit, perhaps.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, for having
Thanks.
me.